You are about to hear something the British government never wanted to reach your ears. Behind the scenes in Westminster, leaders panicked, newspapers tried to hide it, and left-leaning commentators pretended nothing was happening. But the truth exploded like a bomb. In the last 48 hours, the crisis sparked by Keir Starmer's immigration policy has grown so massive that it has turned London into a scene of national revolt. And the most shocking part? It all started with a single speech. A speech Nigel Farage delivered to thousands of outraged, patriotic Britons who can no longer stand watching their country handed over to delusional policies utterly disconnected from reality. What followed was not just a protest, it was the start of a moral uprising, a cry of enough that echoed in the streets, in homes, in pubs, and even within the UK's own institutions. The feeling was clear. The people had awakened, and Starmer had nowhere left to hide. At 11:58 a.m., before a crowd stretching from Parliament Square to Westminster Bridge, Nigel Farage took the stage with a look of indignation and determination. And what he said in that moment, my friends, changed everything. Farage's words struck the country like a political earthquake, shaking public confidence in the Labour government and exposing the wound Starmer has tried so desperately to hide: the absolute inability to protect Britain's borders. As Farage denounced veterans sleeping in cars, pensioners choosing between eating and heating their homes, and British families facing state abandonment, Starmer announced the arrival of 180,000 new asylum seekers, entitled to housing, medical care, lawyers, food, and even luxury accommodation. And as Britons watched, appalled by the sickening disparity between the treatment of the people and the newcomers, something began to grow in the air, a silent, deep anger that was about to explode. When social media started broadcasting clips of the speech, the situation spiraled completely out of control. In less than 20 minutes, the hashtag #StopTheInvasion shot to the top of global trends, overshadowing any international issue and laying bare the feelings of a country that no longer recognizes its own streets. With every video that emerged, the revolting contrast between the treatment of illegal migrants and the abandonment of the British people became ever clearer. Scenes of veterans wrapped in blankets inside cars, while newly arrived migrants enjoyed heated rooms and full meals, shocked millions. The outrage turned to fuel, and pro-government groups scrambled in desperation to contain the fire. But it was already too late. The people had seen, had understood, and above all, had awakened. And it was in this atmosphere of mounting tension that the first clashes erupted. Within minutes, pro-immigration groups and university activists appeared with placards, trying to silence Farage and the thousands present. But the streets were no longer willing to accept this kind of emotional censorship, masquerading as selective empathy. When the groups collided, the police simply lost control. Helicopters were scrambled, sirens echoed through London's historic avenues, and videos showed officers retreating before a crowd not there to play a part. They were there to demand respect, justice, and priority for the British people, something Starmer seems to have completely forgotten. The chaos was not spontaneous. It was the direct result of years of policies disconnected from reality, building up an indignation that had finally found its spark. As the streets seethed, devastating stories began to emerge from every corner of the country, revealing the true face of the crisis Starmer insists on ignoring. Among them, the story of Robert Henderson, a 71-year-old Falklands veteran now sleeping in his own car. The image is heartbreaking. A war hero with a damaged spine, living in indignity while new arrivals receive luxury hotel accommodation in Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds. Robert wakes up every day at 6 in the morning to try and find work. But who hires a 73-year-old British man with combat injuries? His pension barely covers fuel, food, and basic bills. And when journalists ask how he feels, he answers with an honesty that cuts to the soul. "I fought for this country. I bled for this flag. Now they tell me there's no place for me, but there's always room for those who arrive illegally." His ordeal became a symbol of something greater, a country that has turned its back on its own children. On the other side of the coin, the reality is even more shocking. Migrants who crossed the channel in small boats, many without documents, many refusing to identify their origin, were immediately housed in taxpayer-funded hotels, receiving meals, legal support, translators, medical care, and even career advisors. Documents released via FOI show the government spent $8 million in a single week to accommodate new arrivals, enough money to end the veteran homelessness crisis 3 times over. It is such an absurd inversion of values that even long-time Labour voters began to rebel. The British public is not cruel, not xenophobic, but the glaring injustice between those who built the country and those who have just set foot in it has sparked an unprecedented moral revolt. The indignation was not just political. It was human. It was patriotic. It was the limit being crossed before millions. And it was precisely this indignation that reached its peak when a figure who never speaks about party politics decided to break his silence. During a routine visit to a veteran's home in Surrey, King Charles did the unthinkable. He spoke off-script, moved by the stories he heard from men who once risked everything for the country. His comment, short, direct, and devastating, struck Westminster like a bolt of lightning. They gave everything for this nation. They deserve much more than they are getting. Much more. This sentence, spoken before the cameras, was not just criticism. It was a symbolic punch to Starmer's government, exposed before the whole world. For the first time in decades, the monarchy, which always remains neutral, let slip the gravity of the moral crisis gripping the country. Palace aides rushed to control the damage, but it was too late. The truth had been spoken, and it echoed like a roar amid the chaos. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The BBC interrupted its programming to broadcast the King's statement repeatedly. Sky News analyzed, frame by frame, Charles's expression as he spoke of the veterans. Within hours, European, American, and even Middle Eastern newspapers turned the episode into a global headline. Comparisons with dramatic moments in British history began to emerge. For many, this was not just a speech. It was a sign that something profound had broken in the pact between government and people. From that moment, the crisis was no longer just political. It became institutional. It became historic. And as Starmer's popularity plummeted, Nigel Farage emerged as the voice of a nation that felt betrayed. In the streets, tension reached unprecedented levels. Mounted police tried to contain rival groups. Officers under siege suffered assaults. Police horses were injured, and the country watched, stunned, as what became the biggest collapse of public order in decades unfolded. Before I go on, let me ask you something important. If you are following all this and believe this truth needs to reach more Britons who are being misled by the mainstream media, then click subscribe and leave a like right now. This is how you strengthen this channel and ensure that this information is not suppressed by those who try to control what you see. Your support makes all the difference, and I promise to keep bringing you what no one else dares to show. As confusion took hold of the streets, the crisis began to hit the financial heart of the country. The London Stock Exchange plunged at a rate not seen since the collapse caused by Liz Truss. Investors, always sensitive to the smell of instability, rushed to pull billions of pounds out of the British market in a matter of hours. The FTSE 100 lost more than 120 points in a single day, while the value of the pound melted against the dollar, reviving traumatic memories of 2022. International banks like Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan issued severe warnings, recommending immediate reduction of exposure to the UK. Investors moved capital to Frankfurt and Dublin en masse, signaling to the world that Starmer's government had completely lost control. And as the market melted down, Farage gained even more strength, because for thousands of Britons, this was not just about the economy. It was definitive proof that the country was being destroyed by irresponsible decisions. But the real political earthquake would come later, when polls released at 6 p.m. showed a simply devastating scenario for the government. In just 5 days, Starmer's approval rating fell from 38% to a mere 22%. Among the over 50s, his support plummeted to 16%, an absolute disaster for any leadership. And the most stunning blow, Reform UK overtook both Labour and the Conservatives, reaching 31% and taking a lead unprecedented in British political history. It was such a sudden turnaround that analysts were left speechless live on air. Within Labour, panic was absolute. Ministers argued among themselves, papers were thrown, doors were slammed. Even Angela Rayner was discreetly seeking support for a possible leadership challenge. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage appeared on 3 major networks in the same day, repeating a firm, forceful message impossible to ignore. The British people can no longer stand being betrayed. And the people listen. By the way, before I move on to the most explosive part of this story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this video from? I always make a point of reading them all, because it's amazing to see how Britons from all over the country, and even patriots living abroad, are united against this mess the government has created. So comment with your city or region. It really helps to strengthen this community that is growing precisely because no one can stand being lied to anymore. Then came the leak that turned a giant crisis into an irreversible disaster. Internal Home Office documents revealed that the actual number of asylum seekers expected under Starmer's plan was not 180,000, but somewhere between 340,000 and 420,000, more than double what was announced to Parliament and the country. This was not just a political slip. This was a legal bomb capable of bringing down any government. Lying about official figures, especially on an issue as explosive as immigration, could constitute a direct violation of the ministerial code, paving the way for immediate resignation. Within Labour, the shock was absolute. Veteran MPs admitted they had never witnessed such a level of incompetence and cover-up. And as the scandal spread like wildfire, factions within the party began circulating resignation letters, preparing for a possible internal rebellion. Starmer, once seen as a strong leader, now appeared as nothing more than an isolated man, cornered, with no way out. Panic took hold in Downing Street. Emergency meetings stretched late into the night, ministers shouting at each other, aides running through the corridors not knowing what to do. The Defense Secretary reportedly said something that echoed across London. "We can't arrest half the country. That's political suicide." The phrase summed up the desperation of a government completely disconnected from the people. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage capitalized on every second of this implosion. He appeared on GBN, the BBC, and Talk TV in less than 4 hours, repeating uncomfortable truths that thousands of Britons were desperate to hear. His videos racked up 15 million views in a few hours. The Reform UK website crashed 3 times due to the insane volume of new memberships. Donations poured in at an accelerated rate. For the first time, the party was no longer seen as a symbolic alternative. It was now regarded as a real force, capable of taking the helm of the country, something unthinkable months ago, but absolutely possible now. With Labour in collapse, the crisis took on the contours of an institutional earthquake. The Scotland Yard opened investigations into possible crimes involving the manipulation of migration data. The Home Office Inspector General launched emergency audits. And to make matters worse, simultaneous protests erupted in 23 cities, turning the country into a stage for national indignation. The scenes were of pure tension. Outraged Britons, exhausted workers, humiliated veterans, all united by a common feeling of betrayal. The international media labeled the UK as ungovernable, comparing the current instability to historic episodes of rupture. And at the center of this chaos was Starmer. Cornered, worn out, and abandoned by allies who until yesterday called him a savior. He now faced not only the wrath of the people, but the weight of scandals closing in from all sides. The general feeling was clear. Starmer was not just losing support. He was facing the end of his political career before the eyes of the world. And it is at this critical moment that a question begins to dominate conversations in pubs, on social media, on radio shows, and in the streets of the UK. What happens now? With polls plummeting, the party divided, the king breaking his silence, the financial markets melting down, and Nigel Farage rising like a meteor, the scene is one of total rupture. There are rumors that Starmer may resign before Monday. Others claim that the cabinet itself is planning to remove him to avoid an even greater collapse. Either way, the truth is that we are living through one of the most decisive moments in modern British history. The crisis is not just political. It is moral, institutional, and existential. And while many ask whether Labour will survive, others are beginning to ask an even bolder question. Is Nigel Farage about to become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? One thing is certain. History will remember this week as the moment the nation decided to recover, or to be lost forever.